This is Women in Linux. Welcome to the Women in Linux podcast, exposing women to information and careers in technology.
Thanks for joining Women in Linux with your hosts Tamika Reed and Dee Parler. This installment of our CTO series, we're chatting with Lee Jones, CTO of Clear Idea. Lee, thank you for joining us. We've been looking forward to speaking with you.
Finally, I know there's a couple of minor scheduling snags, but again, towards the end of the year, things are a little hectic. So, yeah, looking forward to doing this.
Awesome. So, Lee, we've actually met you at SRQ Hacks as well. Right. And we've had the pleasure of speaking with Teddy Mateo, who is your colleague and CEO of Clear Idea. And so through this journey, can you tell us a little, open up with a little background about yourself and how you got on your journey to Clear Idea?
It's funny. It's a very long story. And I just did a talk on this the other day, which I called my uphill both ways in the snow talk. So, and I started writing software in like 1983. And I started on the little Commodore platforms. And I started professionally when I was about 15, and I started developing my own communication software for terminals. And then I got very into developing my BBS, which was sort of my little brainchild for a few years. And I sold that, and I was making money. Then I think it was Mr. Kennedy at Sarasota High. I took his AP class, and he noticed my abilities immediately. So he gave me the final exam on the first day, which I passed with flying colors. And then he just made me sort of teacher's aide. And through that, I got into, I was sort of captain of the programming team, and we won a few competitions. And he was the one that actually got me my first job when I was 15, my first sort of paying gig outside of selling my own software.
Wow, 15.
Yeah. So that was 1984 or 85. So that's that sort of, there wasn't a lot of curriculum back then for learning computer science, right? So I mean, I just wrote an article. When I got started in assembly language, which I was very into at a young age, I started out with this pirated 5 1/4-inch floppy and like a Xeroxed manual of here, figure it out.
Right. Old school. You got to get in it.
Yeah. And it was all just books, and, it was so exciting to find a book on something you were interested in. Now, it's completely the opposite. There's too much information. Back then. You were just desperate for it.
Right.
So yeah, through that, I got, I've had a very long and, somewhat storied career. I'll skip all the boring parts in the 90s. There were some very cool things, but towards the end, right? So the .com bubble sort of happened, and the company that I was with, I was doing a lot of work on the kernel of Windows CE at the time. So I did some cool stuff. I worked on, I added interrupt sharing, and I worked on a few cool device drivers for a neat project with Microsoft and Ford and Intel. And then that company sort of burned through its 12 million rather unceremoniously.
And, let me get 12 million to burn through.
Yeah, no kidding. And then I was sort of left without a job at was like around the year 2000 or so. And I thought, well, I started Clear Idea in 98 as back then it was called Clear Idea Software, and it was this outlet for my these weird sort of little libraries and APIs that I wrote, and I wrote this mail processing engine, and I sold those things through Clear Idea. And then once I didn't have a job anymore, I figured, well, I might as well focus on this thing and start working on the consulting side. So Clear Idea has been around for quite a while, but it grew very slowly because I've always been loath to do other things than write code. I'm very lucky that I get to do that every day. So over the years, I sort of had to learn all the business things the hard way, and have employees and payroll and a lot of that really boring stuff. Then when Teddy came along, I think it's been 2 years now, we reformed as Clear Idea Labs, all the same resources. We just did an asset transfer and rebranded the company. And then Teddy came in and, because he's got a very complementary skill set to mine. Yeah, he's much more of an executive than I am. So he brought in a lot more strength in the leadership area for as far as having a vision and trying to accomplish things other than my day-to-day goal of writing code.
Right.
So that's kind of led us to where we are now.
Well, that's a good question because you said he has more of an executive role versus you. So, are you looking at that in terms of connecting teams or leadership or being able to talk, or like what's that dynamic like between you being a CEO versus you being a CTO?
I am much better suited at sort of the technical aspects, and it's a good question because really what is a CTO, right? There's sort of three levels to it, I think, and there's obviously a lot of gray areas in between, but people have a startup and then somebody declares themselves as a CTO and it's you're one guy. Are you
Right.
a CTO? Probably not, but for some reason people seem like they need to put that on paper. So the dynamic completely changes when you have your first employee. All of a sudden, like you're not just the sole developer anymore. You've got responsibilities, and you've got to come up with processes. And then you get two employees, and everything that you knew about having one employee is just completely thrown out the window. And then you get you double that, and you get 6 employees, and everything that you thought you knew is out the window again. So I mean, Clear Idea right now, we're at about, I think we're around 14. And I think of that, it varies on the size of the project because we use some contractors too. So it's typically between like 8 and 10 to 12 programmers. And that's where my skill set's at now. And I'm fairly good at what we do in that realm, but I couldn't step up and like be CTO of Amazon or something like that. I just don't even have a concept of how that would work. But there's a big difference between where I am and just being a solo developer with a CTO title or having one employee.
But what you just said is a good lead in to one of the questions that we did have about your skill sets. Like, so you did have, your skill sets that you had when you were just the one employee, or I should say the CTO, versus the skill sets that you have now, where you have to manage a little bit. Well, I won't say a little bit, but a lot more in terms of growing from 1 to 14. Like, like what skill sets that you have going in versus one employee to what the skill sets that you acquired going into, employee number 14, possibly employee number 15. Like those are two different avenues. Like what have you seen yourself grow? How have you seen yourself grow from then to now?
Yeah, I mean, I started out like as far as management and leadership, I had zero skills, none. I'm a great programmer, not so strong with people. So that was all learned the hard way. I read a lot and I try and really focus on that area. I mean, really, 2017, I doubt I'll be writing much code at all. I mean, I'm trying to do it still now, and I'm realizing that it's just it's not a productive exercise. The good thing is that I know what good code looks like. So I'm trying very hard right now to instill that in everybody on the team. So I spend a lot of time, I review every single line of code that everybody writes right now before it goes to production. And that takes a lot of my time, but I'm going back and forth to really make sure they understand what it is that I expect. So then I can put somebody else in charge of that. And then we can start to, have really great documentation on that and really, firm up the code review process. Because we have a lot of continuous integration. So we have a lot of static analysis and unit tests and those things. So my interpretation of the code now, it's sort of based on look and feel a lot and architectural principles and things like that. there's a lot that I had to learn about managing a team, communication, setting expectations, and those things were probably the most challenging for me, because the technical aspects to me have always come very easily. It's sort of the some of the interpersonal things that I had to learn about, and really how to plan these things, because you can. It's very different to schedule a project that has one developer on it than there is when you have 8, and a project of that size that's going to take 6 months.
Right. And then too, I guess putting together a process and a flow. Like, I know you mentioned continuous integration, like Travis CI or Jenkins, or
Mm-hmm.
Using the Atlassian products from Jira, Confluence, and so forth and so on. And then not only using those things, but then there's still if you haven't used those tools, there's still some a learning curve there in order to use those tools. So, when you are searching to build your team, as you continue to build your team, do you have like a list of qualities that you're looking for in people that may not even be technical? Like, sometimes you can get someone that may have good soft skills, but can learn rapidly, or vice versa. Like, so, I think as you've grown over time, you can kind of spot, I guess, the imposter syndrome a mile away as well.
Right. And that's a very good point. I mean, there are sort of two kinds of programmers. Well, as far as skills go, like I spent a lot of time working on the Brain, which is our internal project management system. And each task that we have has to have a minimum of 2 skills attached to it, and then each developer has an earned skills based on levels 1 through 3, and so the Brain can sort of automatically match who would be a good candidate for performing that task. So we do understand a lot of the technical skills. As far as the personal skills, that's it's a little bit different. We know. Our technical interviews aren't very long, because we're gonna talk to you and make sure that you're a pretty cool person, and then we're just gonna give everybody the same little piece of one of our projects to look at and solve one of the problems that we're working on, and it's pretty obvious who has the best solution to it. It's always pretty obvious. There are sort of 2 types of programmers that I end up with, right? They're the really good ones that we just sort of hire, and then there are ones that you make. Now, I've made a couple of pretty good ones so far. That took people that really didn't have a clue. One of my top guys, Trent, he's been with me for 10 years. He was, he barely knew where the power button was when I met him. Now he's a really great application engineer. He's a really strong Rails programmer. He's a strong iOS programmer. He's a strong PHP programmer. He's come a long way. But that's, when you sit in a room with me, you're going to learn things. And right. he had to deal with all my lack of tact and interpersonal issues to get him to where he is today. So he certainly paid his dues, but you can definitely recognize somebody who has a capacity to learn and build on them. And those are some of my favorite things, because then they end up doing things the way I like them.
I know it sounds like a monopoly, right?
Right.
It sounds like you're monopolizing the person, but that's so true. It's like it's not that you don't trust it, that they're going to go out there and learn things that they need to learn. It's just you have not necessarily a way, and it is a way, but you've just seen the industry, and that the good and the bad, right? So you want to give that person the good, and just don't even go down the road of being bad, because it's hard to autocorrect that.
Yeah, but our processes change all the time, and that's just part of the industry. I have to be out there scouring constantly. What's the next best thing that everybody's using? What's Why are they using it? How can we implement this? How is this going to help us? How does this affect our process?
Right.
Because we do agile, but we've evolved it. We sort of started agile before it really took off, and we've got our way of doing it that's a little bit more agile.
Right. That works for you guys.
Yeah, so we have a lot of smaller sprints that might go on at the same time with smaller teams that we combine into sort of a bigger sprint on a release. And this is all just through continuous integration and continuous deployment that we can do these things. It's all automated, what goes to which server based on what QA gets notified of, because all of our test cases are generated automatically too through our system. So when anything transitions from one state to the next, there's associated tasks that are automatically generated that keep QA and other people apprised of what they need to do next. And that just changes all the time based on even our interpretation of how the process flow works, from gathering requirements to gathering and creating functional and technical specifications and creating tasks out of those and creating a backlog and sprints out of those things. It's just a constantly evolving thing, and we have to be super agile about our process flows by themselves, let alone what people are actually implementing in code and what language and what IDE. All these things are just constant state of flux, but it's amazing. This is a fantastic place to be right now.
Right. And so the past couple of days, I think for the past, probably it's not even the last couple of days, but for the past 2 weeks, we've been looking at, Dion and I have been looking at what's going to be the best flow as we build, and then start bringing in interns and start bringing in people on full time, like getting that process down. And I'm sure it's going to change as we start adding.
Right.
But we still have to have some foundation right now. Right.
Yeah, you start out with, even if it's a terrible idea, it's better than having no idea. Right.
Right.
You just fix it in the mix, man.
Agreed.
Right. So, we've been looking at things like Trello or making mind maps. And then I've been looking at design sprints, right? Mm-hmm. So there's this design sprint out there from goweekly.co. And basically it's a 5-day sprint. It's, the first day you understand it, the second day you sketch, the third day you decide, the fourth day you prototype, and the fifth day you validate. And that's validating, going out, talking to customers. And it's funny because when I'm talking to Dion about ideas, she was like, "You think it just can happen overnight?" And I'm like, "Yeah. Why can't it just happen overnight, right?"
Every idea happens overnight. You might not get it right overnight. It might be the 400th idea before you get it right.
Right.
It sounds good in her brain, and I understand it. And it could, if it was only dependent on her, it could happen overnight.
So and I come from me. I look at stuff and I'm like, why can't we get this out? What is the holdup? Where's the stop button at? Who's got their hand or their foot on it, and so I can kick it off so we can keep this thing moving. But that comes to something I talk about in terms of as we make MVPs. You guys are doing MVPs. And you talked about, you actually taught someone how to, program and but not just program, but become a good programmer, right? Mm-hmm. But how do you mentor someone to say, what languages and concepts they should be following? Because as they work on MVPs, they have ideas and they want to go out and start their own business or, make an API or whatever the case may be. How do you mentor someone with everything that's out there? Like, how do you boil down to the bare bones of that?
Well, if I'm going to mentor somebody, it's going to be based on sort of what I've done. So the cool thing is that over the years, I've worked in probably 30 different languages, some really obscure things. But it all started because I have a very solid foundation in C, and then I went to C++. So I had like 12 really strong years of object-oriented programming that sort of helped me you just pick up things very quickly. So when it comes down to mentoring, like, so when we have somebody that comes to us on the custom software development side and needs something, I pretty much know. A lot of times people have an idea of what hardware that they want to use, right? They want an iOS app. Well, it's obvious we're going to do it in Objective-C, or, now Swift, or we don't do any of the sort of cross-platform apps. We just do native apps. And if it's Android, it's going to be a Java thing. So it's not very difficult to understand the language that it's going to be. Unless it's a web-based thing, then it's sort of a performance and time-based thing. We did a lot of stuff in PHP before we really picked up Rails and started running with it. And we still do a lot of stuff in PHP. But, it just depends on what's the best tool for the job. There's a lot of overhead in Rails that comes along, too, that you just have to understand. And based on that, we can understand how we're going to deliver it. And then it just comes down to, when you're mentoring somebody, is being in the same room with them, or at least being in constant communication with them. And I just spend endless hours on the whiteboard, just drawing things and wearing out markers. But that's how it got done,
You're listening to Women in Linux. I'm glad we got back to that point, because it also, on the other person end, it takes a extreme amount of trust to believe what that person is telling you and that they're taking you in the right direction. And, when it comes to team and team building, for you to take that time out and for your team to trust that you're taking them where they need to go is huge, because it cuts down on a lot of confusion. Because we always talk about as a team being of one mind.
Yeah, and I think that, I have not a lot of ego involved in this. And if somebody steps up and is better than me at a certain part of this, I have no problem getting out of the way. I'm much more into just seeing things get done than having me be the one that does them, or me being the bottleneck in them getting done. So I'm hoping that at some point, there's going to be some great leadership that happens outside of me. Not that I'm a great leader. That's what I'm hoping for.
And so I mean, but the two of that statement Dion made and what you made, like, what tools do you use to help the communication with your teams, and how do you keep them engaged? If you have little mini sprints and then they go into a bigger sprint, there still has to be some type of communication between those teams, because you don't want them to be siloed. Right. So how do you keep the communication going with the team and keep everyone engaged on everything?
Yeah. So as far as tools, we've certainly run the gamut of every possible chat tool available, because we have a bunch of remote people, and even though a lot of us sit in the same room, we still communicate through chat, just because that's what keeps everybody in line. And if people are working from home or whatever, that works out pretty well. So we did Campfire way back, which was a pretty miserable experience. We did HipChat, and then when Slack came out, we sort of tepidly, put the pinky toe in there to see what it was like, and just went, no, this thing's awesome. We've been on Slack for years now, and we have everything integrated into Slack. We have our, the brain, our project management system integrated into Slack, and we end up with a lot of rooms. Because we have a lot of projects, but then we have multiple rooms per project. So we have one that's just based for notifications, and one for if there's like sort of a sub team. So it's a we're pretty disciplined in our use of Slack, and the only problem with it is it's a never-ending source of notifications if you let it be. So we have to make sure that everybody has time to, put it in do not disturb mode and get some stuff done, and not have the expectation that somebody's going to respond to you immediately when they need something. Because there's just so many of those little flashing lights and badges that go on during the day.
Yeah, I'm a slacker.
It's amazing. It really is.
She's an avid slacker. And I'm going to be a productive slacker. I've been learning so many like little tips and tricks, and I was like, I'm moving everything to Slack so I can be in one place. So
Right.
you definitely need to be a productive slacker.
Yeah, and that comes down to that little do not disturb icon and just using that.
It will suck you in. It will suck you in. And she's like, I put that on Slack today. And I'm like, I was doing something else.
Yeah, and I had like 400. I mean, I get so many in the mornings when we're kicking off and just getting started, because we do our stand up in Slack too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wow.
it's just, it's probably until about 11 o'clock. It's just, that's all I'm doing is sitting on Slack and responding to questions from people. And then I can start doing other things that are sort of less granular.
Right. Now, I know you're involved in building like the MVP process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, so what advice would you give someone who has an idea and they want to go from, I guess, 0 to 60? Like, do you tell them to go from 0 to 60 in a month, or do you tell them to go from 0 to 60 in a week? What advice? What's the good starting point would you give someone on building out their MVP?
The first thing it comes down to is what is their business objective? The problem is that the people have sort of romanticized this whole technology startup thing. And it's like, we've
Preach.
literally had like somebody contact me like, well, I've got this budget of $700 and I really want to create something like Facebook. Like, I can't even believe I'm having this conversation. You can't even get a logo made for $700, buddy. I don't know.
Right.
But so what are their business goals? What are they trying to do? And then what we have a list of sort of a litany of questions because we sort of want to stack the deck in our favor when we do a custom project because there's such a high attrition rate. Like our portfolio just it's like it's like a string and somebody just set fire to one end. So there's so many of these things that we build that just are gone in a year, and it's sad. But that's just sort of this startup culture. I think, people view it as this disposable entity that they just get to play around with, so they're going to get an investor and somebody else is going to put money into it. And then if it doesn't work, I'll just create another one. But no, it's a business. You got to treat it like a business. And, business plans are annoying and they never actually, no business, I don't think has ever been launched that, stuck to their business plan, but it's just the fact that they did that exercise. They understand what business they're in. They've done their market research. They understand their customer demographics. They've got budgets together for all these operational things that they need to be aware of. So when they have a business goal, I need to make sure, like, what are their KPIs? Like, when they're building this thing, what parts of this application are going to contribute towards their end business goal, and how do they measure it? And if they have to, take a look at all these other, because we get people show up with just enormous storyboards, and I'm just like, wow, you're looking at a project that far exceeds your budget, and the problem is that it's 90% things that they just think would be cool, and these cool things have nothing to do with really achieving what their business goal is, and they don't understand the cost that comes down to it. So I really, really make them pare down and go, let's just figure out in an agile way, what's the first thing we can deliver that's going to get you customers, and you can start to figure out, because you think you have an idea who your customer is, but you really don't know. You don't know until they start using this thing that we haven't even built yet. So, I mean, I'm a very strong advocate for really paring it down and trying to build the smallest thing possible that's going to prove their model. Now, that's, people who have come to us in the past with very big projects, and they've thought through them very well, and then we'll build them. But that's sort of the exception to the rule, really.
And then going out, I've looked at Prototype.io. I've looked at different, prototypes that you could put together, different, I should say, applications that you can use to put together your idea and storyboard your idea and so forth and so on. But it still comes back down to the bare bones, right? Who's gonna do this? how much time is it going to take to do it, and what type of skills does that person have to do it. So you can be that CEO, but if you don't know anything tech or you don't understand the language, you're back at the $20,000, $50,000 model of spending because of the lack of knowledge. And so I try to at least talk to people to say, hey, if you don't know tech, you should at least try to learn the language. And when I say the language, that falls not into programming language, but just understanding terms and understanding what you're looking for. So when you go talk to someone and they're going to go build your idea out, you at least have an idea. You at least know where it stands, and so it's not gibberish. Because I get a lot of people that are like, "Well, I'm looking for a CTO." I'm like, "Well, I've identified 4 different CTOs. That's your infrastructure CTO, your software CTO, and then the evangelist, and then I call the other person the unicorn, which comprises of all 3. I haven't found that person just yet. Hopefully they're out there, but understanding I know one person, she's a CTO, but she's a software CTO or software-based CTO, but she's like, I don't want to be the CEO either. She's the CEO, CTO. She's looking for a CEO. She's looking for somebody to go out there and talk because she doesn't want to talk. She wants to program. Kind of sounds like you. She wants to program.
It was exactly who I thought about when he said, I wasn't doing that.
Well, 2017 is the year where I'll be talking more and coding less, I promise.
Right. And that's, to me, I even though people some people do CTO roles or they're in a CTO role and they don't have the title either or, it's not necessarily for me the title. It's the skill sets behind it that help make the title, right? Like understanding, hey, today is Swift and tomorrow is Ruby on Rails, and then the next day it may be something else, or understanding which cloud provider to use and why you chose that cloud provider.
Right.
Are you saving money by going with IBM? Does someone have an initiative? Are you doing machine learning? Where are you doing machine learning at? Are you using Watson? Are you using Google? All those things come into play. And so, a lot of people who are developers that don't have that infrastructure knowledge. I often always ask, I was like, well, how do you scale? It's like, well, you build your app to scale. I was like, okay, so you build your app to scale. What are you building it on? I don't care where I build it at. That's the question. That's the answer. I don't care where I build it at. And I'm like, okay, you don't care where you build it at, but okay, when you get hit with the bill, you should, right? you should understand why your bill is the cost that it is. You should understand, how to use that environment, right? How do you use Google's environment or Amazon or whatever? How do you use that environment? What's the best? Should you be using a VPC or should be using a EC2 instance, or should you be using DigitalOcean because you really don't need all of that computing power? I've seen
them all over and engineered, so many times. How many, they're paying thousands of dollars to Amazon every month. I'm like, you need one machine. I don't know what you're planning on doing here, but
they're ruling the world.
Yeah,
one machine at a time.
Back to your original comment, though, you said something about, the CEO, if they don't have a CTO or they're, and this comes down to us, like when people sort of outsourcing, because they'll usually go out of the country first and fail fantastically, and then they come back to us. But we have like an onboarding slideshow presentation that we would do, and we would try and walk everybody through the entire process and have this document and make sure that they understood everything that was going on and how it would work and how all the intricacies of the process, and make them sign off on the document. And they just did not care. Their eyes would glaze over. They'd be like, yeah, that's great. When are we starting? So getting them to actually care about that's the challenge. Like I thought I did great work in putting together this, material to educate them. I just couldn't get them to care about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's one of my focuses, a goal for the year 2017 is to define those basic skill sets, right? Because without the basic skill sets, the advanced ones are not going to make any sense to you. And so one of the things I've been listening to is I've been listening to this book. I think it's called. I listened to Modern AI, and I also listened to an algorithms book, and I forget the title right now. But it's basically the algorithms book talks about how you can understand algorithms from a perspective of your everyday life. Like sorting. Hey, I washed my clothes. Now it's time to make my socks, but they're in the pile. So I go into the pile and I pull out my socks, sorting out, what's in the pile. Like how many attempts is it going to take you to find a mate for your socks, right? So, right. So you laugh, but that's a great way to explain to someone when you're have to make something for someone, and you're like, okay, we're going to have to use this sorting algorithm, so forth and so on. But it helps explain what that actually is for someone who's that CTO or CEO, right? So, it's a lot of things that we can cover, but from your perspective, what are the bare minimum tech skills you think a CTO should have?
So what you were talking about, like I'm big on those sort of things, the overall patterns of everything. So I make sure that everybody understands design patterns. That we can talk about singletons, and we can talk about pub sub models, and we can talk about all these different mechanisms that make up an object-oriented design that are just standard ways of talking about it. And then the infrastructure, I think, what you were saying about infrastructure is very important anymore. Like you have to have at least the base knowledge. I mean, you have to be a pretty strong Unix admin just because, and you have to understand how networks work fairly well. I mean, you have to understand cloud architecture and all the elements of scaling and all the different, you have to know the difference between, SQL and NoSQL and the costs and drawbacks of that. I mean, what I'm learning is, and this is what I'm working very hard on, is that I have to know more about the abstracts anymore than I do about the concrete implementations of everything. So I need to delegate that. So I need I can understand the abstracts well enough that I can find the right people to delegate to create these concrete implementations for me. So yeah, for me, I think that the bigger your company gets, the more you have to just understand abstract, because I'm just not going to be able to sit around and write code all day as much as I'd like to. It's not realistic. So I do have a lot of concerns about like what happens to my skills if I don't do that. But on the other hand, the company will never grow if I don't do that. So there's my challenge.
Right. It's how do you keep your skills up to date?
And then that's it. So now I have to just make sure that I stay abreast of things from an abstract level and not really get caught up in wanting to toggle zeros and ones all day.
And that's hard. I guess that's kind of like how I feel, but not how I feel. Like, what happens if something, an idea I have kicks off and I can build it out, but now I don't want to build it anymore because I need to go get more funding for the idea, or I need to bring in more resources for this idea to keep it afloat, to keep people employed, so forth and so on. How do I maintain my skill set? I don't want to, you spent, over 20 years with these skill sets, and then you're supposed to just take them and toss them. And,
that's the whole thing. I think those skill sets were very important foundation for me. There's sort of the batter for the cake, and now I'm working on the icing. So now, I don't think that I'm going to be throwing them away at all, because their skills have a great deal of value, and then I can understand a good programmer. I can just look at somebody's code and know what they're capable of. I know what they're thinking. So that in itself, that's never going to not be a value. But now I just have to start thinking much bigger picture than I have done in the past.
Right. And then the other part of this question was the soft skills. Communication, I think, is big, but then the communication is one piece, right? It's how do you communicate? You guys use Slack and you have stand up, but how do you deliver your message is another thing, right? You may say to someone good morning, and they're like, well, why are they speaking to me today? They didn't say good morning yesterday, right? So, the delivery of that message is just as important. So, what do you have any recommended books for making sure that your team has the right amount of soft skills, or you yourself have the right amount of soft skills to deliver to your team? Because that's important, because people come from different backgrounds and thought processes and cultures. How do you maintain your soft skill set?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because communication's something that, especially interpersonal communication, is something that just never really occurs to programmers. Why the hell would I want to talk to somebody else? That's crazy. But in the early 90s, we had this sort of outsourced team of developers in Russia. We'd hired all these Russian PhDs. This is before we sort of got bought by Lucent and all that stuff. And we got bought by this company called Octel, and they basically gave us this ultimatum of either bring him here or shut it down. So we brought several of the engineers over, and it was just those communication skills alone was very different, because you would see somebody in the hallway, you'd be like, hey, how you doing, and keep walking, and that was so offensive to them, because you asked them how they're doing, and then you didn't even stop to listen. Like, that was an insult. And we just had to learn all these things the hard way. Like, how did we communicate with these guys? Because they were just so different culturally. And then you start to figure out, just like everybody in your team is a little bit more, it has their own sort of culture. So, we're a bunch of dudes. So we have a way of communicating that, we're just guys, and we're just rude to each other, and we make fun of each other all the time. And that's in a way how we show our love. but it still comes down to the fact that some are more sensitive than others. And we have to be very aware of that. Mm-hmm. So those skills, you can get, training and read books, but you just have to start looking at people and judging how what you're saying is affecting them, and how you can improve that, because you want everybody to be in the best mood possible. And that's when they're the most productive. So right. Keeping people happy, it's just it's a never-ending thing, right? There's always somebody that's going to be unhappy about something.
You're listening to Women in Linux.
And sometimes it's people are unhappy because of the, not necessarily not being heard. Some people expect for you to read exactly what you just said, their body language and so forth or so on, to determine whether or not something bothered them. But some people are really good at being stoic, and they don't. You can't read their body language, so you have no idea whether it affected them or not. So I always kind of put ownership back on the person to say, you have to tell someone it made you uncomfortable.
That's a very good point.
You if not, like I was told, silence is agreement. So if you don't say anything, then if you're silent, then you actually agree with that. So you know, in that moment, in that time, you know, you might want to say, hey, it bothered me, or something of that nature, so that person knows, or at least is aware of, you know, or pull them to the side and say it, or what have you. But you know, there's a way you can be vocal without being rude, and there's a way you can get your message across sometimes without even being vocal. You know, so you know, I always put the ownership back on the person to say something, and the ownership on the other end for the person to receive that person, right? If someone's, you know, telling you they're upset or they're mad, you know, just receive that, like, because I mean, and me and Deanna, we've gone back and forth with that as well, just as friends, you know, like, you know, hey, I didn't like when you said X, Y, and Z, or I didn't like when you did X, Y, Z. That's not comfortable with me. You know what I mean? Like, that's just truth, right?
Right.
I think the key there was you said something. I now identify that you have said something. I need to understand why you felt that way. For me, this is just totally for me.
Yeah.
So that I don't make sure that I don't do that again. Because, you know, saying that it bothered you is one thing, but me to understand why it bothered you is another thing.
Right, because otherwise you're just doing it out of sort of, you know, rote obedience. Okay, I won't do that again because I made it sad, but really, what was the cause of that?
Yeah, and I don't care. Like, yeah, and that's a communicate, because I don't care. It triggered a feeling for you. And so for me as a friend, it is, well, this is how it made you feel, and I don't want you to feel like that anymore. You know, so whatever I can do, no matter why you felt like that, it still triggered this feeling. And you're going to tell me that why, and I understand why, but for me, I don't need the why.
Yeah.
But again, it goes back to communication and how people communicate, and in learning and respecting those different communication styles, and being that we understand our communication styles, growing a team that doesn't particularly know your communication styles, and then growing a team with everybody has a different type of communication style.
Yeah, and I'm not particularly known as being a super sensitive person, and so I, you know, often say things just off the top of my head, and then sort of think back on them and go, "Wow," because if my wife's not around to, you know, kick me under the table or poke me, I just sort of say these things, and I go, "Oh boy, I should probably." And you know, the old me just would have just not even thought of it, but you know, now I have to actually think about it and follow up. Go, hey, you know, I said that thing. I just want to make sure that I didn't offend you, and that, you know, you understood what I was trying to get at and why I was saying that. You know, and Slack's really good for that too, because you always got that private channel in Slack, and you can just sort of, you know, nudge somebody and make sure that everything's good.
And that's growth, though. That's definitely
well,
growth.
I'm if anything, I am self-aware. I have a laundry list of things I have to work on, but I am aware that I have to work on them.
But that's a good point, because what I've, you know, and I've been in the industry now going on 17 years, and I've always been on the predominantly male, white male team. And what I have found, you know, that's just the team. That's just what somebody's going to say something offensive. Mm-hmm. You know, you have to kind of determine like how you're going to handle that. So I come from a different era. I know our listeners and our followers are probably going to think differently. Like, you shouldn't have to take that abuse. But until there's more women in the field and more sensitivity training, and I don't really want to call it sensitivity training. I really want to say more self-awareness is just what you said. Until those things happen, we're gonna always be in these situations where someone is gonna say something that's offensive, but you have to arm yourself with the right tools and the right communication to say that offended me, and not allow a person to dump their stuff onto you. They may put it on your plate, but it don't have to sit there. You can take it and dump that plate right back to them. And I that's my mindset is okay, I'm not going to take that. That wasn't really comfortable with me. I'm going to tell you why, and now I'm going to dump this right back onto you. So you can deal with that however you see fit, but I'm cool over here. Like, don't break the happy space.
Keeping it moving. Yeah.
Right.
That's one of my quotes is like, be aware of the energy that you're bringing into my space. Be very aware, because everybody's truth is different, and their reality and their truth at that moment is what they got going on. And most of the time people come in with their bag of stuff and they don't care about what anybody has going on. They just want to get their stuff done first because it's broken and they got something to do. One thing that I love what we do over at Women in Linux is that we call it putting on your big girl panties. Like, we're not coming to the table saying we want it to be, we're coming in to be treated a certain way, or we're complaining about all these particular issues. We're telling, our community that these are the issues. And going back to what Tamika's saying is these are the skills that you need to do to not deal, but arm yourself and be prepared to deal with the issues. I do appreciate that a lot.
And with that being said, as you continue to grow and at Clear Idea, how do you see diversity being included on your team, internally, or maybe through contracting or so forth, or even within the community that you serve? How is diversity being handled in your area for growth?
It's a pretty good question in that, right now it's just simply not on my radar. We're a small company, and my responsibilities are to my partner, to my team, and to our customers. And my responsibility to them is that if we have a very low turnover rate. So, maybe once a year or so, because I've had the same guys with me for a long time. But maybe once a year we have to hire them, and I interview everybody the same way. So I'd like to see more diversity in the applications that we receive, and I'd like to think that we go through the right channels to try and solicit that. But there's just not a lot that comes our way.
Mm-hmm.
I would say just from a female perspective, I think the last time I worked with a female programmer was probably around 92.
Okay.
But the last 16 years or so have just been my little company, and before that we were, it was a big, Actually, when I worked with Laura, was her name, I think there was probably only 5 or 6 of us on the engineering team at that time. So I think that was probably a very rare thing, statistically and demographically, that was a 1 in 5 that took place, and especially in a little town like this that really had no technology to speak of back then. So I as far as that goes, are there things that you guys recommend that we should be doing, and how we should be handling a hiring process to sort of to foster that?
Yeah, there's different channels. So to me, what I never see employers do is, and I get this all the time from different employers, is going to the HBCUs, and when I say that, historically black colleges, and actually going on to the campus. And the reason why I say that is because sometimes what happens is what that company will say is, then you go. Like, I'm going to send this black person to go communicate with these black people. And what ends up happening is it's not me that has the problem with the communication, and it's not me that they're going to work for. It's you. So you have to I always tell people, put yourself in an uncomfortable situation and then figure out how to be comfortable. Because until you put yourself in a situation to where you're uncomfortable, then you're going to always do the things that are comfortable, and you're going to get the same results. It's the groupthink idea, right? So if you make yourself uncomfortable, or put yourself in a situation where you're uncomfortable, I should say, and it may not be uncomfortable, but get outside of doing things the normal way. Actually going into, the communities, and, the hackathon is a good start. It's a good idea. It's a good start, but it's also a lot of kids or a lot of women in those situations have no idea what a hackathon is, or what the outcome can be from a hackathon, right?
Right.
And you saw that from being there at the hackathon that weekend, like with the idea of what kids thought or what they think or whatever. They didn't have a clue, especially on my team. They were like, well, we're going to do this, and then what? Oh, okay, that's cool. You know what I mean? Like, so when do we eat? When do we eat?
Oh man,
when do we eat? When do I get my treat?
Shut up and sit down.
Right.
Come with some stuff.
Right. And so for me, I think one, going to the HBCUs is a good start. Another one is we talked to the CTO of Meetup.com, and her in her podcast, she actually said in her podcast, I'm solely focused on females of color in positions at Meetup.com. Like, she's like, I make it an effort to go to meetups and actually just walk up to that person of color in the room and just start talking to them. Like, that was her thing. But awesome. Again, that goes back to what I said: make yourself uncomfortable to the point where it becomes comfortable, right? After you do that for so long, it's just comfortable for you to do that. Like, oh, okay, let me go over here and talk to. Oh, okay, let me go over here and talk. And I find that that works. But I do. That's just something that I just do myself because I really didn't have a choice, right?
Right.
As a person, as a woman who does Linux administration and SAN storage administration and any other thing that you could possibly think of, I probably touched it, right? So when I go to a class or when I go to a meetup or when I go to a location, I'm usually that only woman, and I'm usually the only woman of color in the whole room. So for me, it's like, it's normal to me. Like, oh, I'm just gonna, if it's a little hole, I'm Barry Sanders. When I'm you know what I mean? I'm coming through the hole and I'm cutting through, and I don't care what nobody says. Like, nope, that information is for me. Nope, yep, that's something I need to learn. Yep, that's just me though. But I think, and this may be a wrong thing to say, but I think everyone should have that idea. Like, they should have that knack. Like, when you walk in a room, yep, that information is from me, and yep, I'm sitting in the front and I'm asking questions, I'm getting cards, and I'm keeping that thing moving, and I'm make sure I contact you. But I think you just have to be that aggressive.
Yeah,
and
that's just having the hustle, right?
Yeah, and I think diversity has to be that aggressive. I think if you want to have diversity on your team and your staff, you have to be aggressive. Like, you have to go out and knock on doors, like, literally knock on the high school door and say, I want to talk to your female programmers that are in here. What are you guys learning? What are you teaching? Like, you have to be that aggressive, because if you don't, what I've learned, if you're not that aggressive, it will pass you by. And you would be another 30 or 40 years, and you would look up and you're like, I haven't seen a woman in tech in 40 years. Wow.
But also, I'm 76 years old, and I just need a nap right now.
Right. But that's my thought process. That's what I think has to happen. Whether that's a personality thing for someone to take on as well or do it as well, I don't know, but that's just, you ask me my thought process, that's my thought process. Be Barry Sanders in the room and knock on the door, squeeze through the hole. Don't let anyone reject you. Like, no, hey, you over here at Spelman. Hey, you over here at Bethune-Cookman. Hey, you over here at Howard. Hey, you over here at University of South Florida or wherever the campus is. Hey, I need for y'all to come here and look at this. And we need these skill sets. You guys need to have these skill sets. And that's reaching out to the schools as well, and understanding what they're learning. I often say that the schools and the employers, I think the employers should fund the meetups, and the school should make it mandatory that the students in the engineering and the programming classes go to the meetups, because those are the ones that are teaching the new skill sets that you need to have. Those are your rapid deployment, your Travis CI, your Jenkins, your continuous integration, your Sprint, your design, your prototypes. That's where you're getting those skill sets at. It's not sitting in college and learning, what algorithms are, and then you go program it. Now you have to implement that in a project that you're already doing using machine learning and computer vision.
Because by the time you leave college, jobs that are hiring want you to have these skills.
I suppose, demographically, it has to be that, there's a lot more, women and people of color in computer science now. Because I would say that it's, pretty much been in sort of a white male dominated thing since I can recall. So, are there actual numbers on sort of college students now that are in that field?
Yeah, there are numbers. There are numbers, and there's also conferences as well too. Getting attended, for me over the years, attending conferences has made a world of difference. We're not at the conferences though, and the ones that are there, they're the company sent them, but they don't speak, and that's a whole nother story. But I think in terms of numbers, I think the numbers are huge, but I think the opportunity after college or what you should have learned while you're in college is across the board is not the same. Right. I think when you start talking about computer science and you start talking about computer engineering and kids coming out, I can guarantee you that none of them have built an instance on AWS, or they haven't built an instance on Google Cloud. So that's that lack of knowledge gap that I talk about. You ask a student, do they have a GitHub account? And they's like, I heard of it. You know what I mean? That's where I say the companies who are in the industry have a duty to give back in that regards, and the school should be pushing these kids to come to these meetups, and these employers should be sponsoring them because what happens is you go outsource to another city, and you're getting these kids from another city, but you're not cultivating what you have here. So you end up paying for relocation. You end up having to get housing. You end up having to build the community in which they can come to. And so you end up spending, instead of that $90,000 that you're giving them in salary, it's really like $300,000, right? For that first year, because you got to move them, you got to get them ramped up, you got to get them set up to speed on things that you're doing and how you do it, and you hope that they stay.
Throw all that money away.
Right. You hope that they stay. So, but if I could get a kid who's 20 miles down the road and doesn't want to make that 20-mile commute anymore and wants to move a little closer, that's less money that I'm spending because they're local. We're building a community. He's going to tell his friends, or she's going to tell her friends, and so now you got that community built, and now you're starting to see that change in the own community. But I think as a collective, it has to change. But I don't think the schools can do it. I know the schools. It's not. I don't think the schools can do it. I know the schools can't do it on their own. They've proved that already. They've proven that already. So that's my 2 cents on it. I'm sure Dion has her own, but that's my 2 cents.
I mean, we have this conversation all the time about investing in your community. And we just went to an event for the Tampa Bay Innovation Alliance, and we spoke to someone, and he is saying that, he goes to conferences all around the United States, and every city has the same problem, is hiring. And and he had just come from a conference in Silicon Valley, and they're having a problem with hiring. However, I am from San Francisco, and, we've had this conversation where I wasn't introduced to STEM, anything STEM at all. And how kids, it goes back to exposure versus access. They may have, you expose them, but how do you access these things? And, in here, it has to be where, you, and I feel the same way about churches, is that you come from behind your four walls of the culture climate that you've invented for yourself, which is, if you're going to spend, 8+ hours in a space every day, you want it to be comfortable for yourselves. And it goes back to what Tam said, is making yourself uncomfortable. But if you are doing business in a community, you need to invest in that community, and the members of the community definitely need to see you, because we have some great learning institutions here. And being that we go across the country to these conferences and networking events, Tampa Bay area, including Sarasota, is not even on the map for tech. They don't even think tech exists here. And it's sad.
Well, they don't think tech exists in the South.
Period.
So, you know what I mean? So, we could separate this with Tampa Bay, Orlando, Jacksonville, Alabama, South Carolina, whatever, right? We can separate that all day long. But what the truth of the reality is, we was with a venture capitalist earlier this year, and she was like, "Is there any tech in the South?" And that's what people think. Like I'm like, well, you don't think we swipe cards? You don't think that people, she was like, are there any major tech companies in the South? And I was floored, because I was just like, well, yeah. What, in regards to like New York or Silicon Valley, outside of those two areas, now I think Chicago is up and coming in regards to that, and Seattle. That's it. Like, so the only tech cities that really people think about are New York, Chicago, Silicon Valley, Seattle, and Chicago is now coming up. And New Orleans had something going on. But when you talk about the Southeast as a whole, no one thinks about tech out of the Southeast, period. How do you miss all those states? So I don't know. That has to change.
Yeah, there's been various sort of things in this area that happened. The CEO of the company that I started working for in like 1990, after they got bought by Octel, he left and started like another little multimedia software company. And one of the things that he did then, he started something, so I think it was called the Sarasota Technical Council. And they did like they had some job fairs, and they got a lot of press. They did like a sort of an expo where all the tech companies, I think probably like 4 or 5 of them at the time, they got to sort of go and display all their wares, and there was an attempt to bring some awareness to the industry back then, but that was 96, and I haven't really seen that much go on like that since then.
So what do you in your eye, what do you think needs to happen? Or what would you like to see happen? Let's ask that.
I don't know that really that much needs to happen. I think that there's a lot of cool stuff going on here. I think it's just a matter of awareness and perspective, really. There's probably, VCs are very focused in sort of the New York and San Francisco area, and they're just not going to move away from their little treasure troves. So, as far as attracting VCs to this area, there's a community in Naples that's, a VCs that's just starting to grow. And I think that as more of the local tech projects become successful, and I think if they sort of dig their heels in and refuse to be dragged to California or New York, that'll just open their eyes that there's a lot of talent and innovation that's going on in this area, because it's already here. They just need to be aware of it, right?
Right. And that's another topic I always bring up is the presentation of information. Sometimes tech can be so abstract that, it's a turnoff to some people. And it's not even just tech. It's like, how do you, the area in which you live, how do you present that information, So for me, it's always about the presentation. It's not necessarily making it cool. It's just making it where someone can understand it. If you talked about you're going to prototype something, they're like, okay, what are we prototyping? What does that actually mean? And what kind of work goes into that? Right. So sometimes it may even help to have like a 5-minute video of this is prototyping. Boom, here you go. And somebody be like, oh, okay, well, I think I can try that. Those things are less, making it less abstract is, I guess, one of my major focuses as well, too. This is the end of our session. Okay. Do you have this our shameless plug where you can shout out your dog that was barking in the background, or your Twitter account, or your wife or daughter or son?
It's my beautiful wife's birthday today.
So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
So my beautiful wife's birthday today. So Katie Jones, happy birthday. As far as some of the shameless plugs, I mean, you can go to the website clearidea.us and you'll see, a lot of the things that we're incubating right now. We've got the radio project, which is sort of the next big thing, and that's taken a large amount of our focus. We got Go to the Keys that we're just rolling out a new version of it. We've got Harvest, which is an amazing take on sort of a hiring application, and then we've got our internal sort of productized service Zoingly that we're chugging along with. So I mean that's I think that's pretty much all I got. Shameless plug wise, but I mean I want to thank you guys for having me on, and this was really, really great and enlightening conversation for both of you. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Yeah, I just hope as we continue to grow here in Florida and in the Southeast period that, people, again, sprint to the end, instead of being the marathon. I don't think we're living in a time of we've lived in the marathon time. We've trained. Now it's time to sprint. So that is my goal. I should make a T-shirt. Women in Linux is all about the sprint.
Right. And we want clear idea to sprint with us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to the Women in Linux podcast. Women in Linux is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization created to get women involved in the field of IT using Linux as a foundation. You can connect with Women in Linux through social media at Women in Linux on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. To join weekly meetups, go to meetups.com/Women in Linux. For more information and to connect with Women in Linux, go to www.womeninlinux.com.